I don't break it. So I'm Judit Kalman from Corvinus University, Budapest, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some gender differences in subjective well-being across European welfare regimes. I must warn you, this is really very much a work in progress, and I'm also one of those who are kind of new to this field. I'm coming from a public policy, political economy background, so that's why my interest in politics. But when I started looking at a lot of policy papers, I saw also the issues of well-being coming up more and more, and we saw the work of OECD and many other in the policy fields have been leading this field. And then also there's this whole gender gap puzzle in happiness, which is that women usually have higher life satisfaction, but also more depression, as have been pointed out with previous papers. And then also there's a decline in this gap. So, maybe we should look into it a little bit more. And also, if we try to link it with literature on welfare states and on female labor force participation and family work policies and stuff like that, then we see that there is really a lot of change in these patterns across European societies. There's quite a diversity, and then also gender roles are changing. So, that's where my interest is coming from. This is just a background for you on female employment rates from the 1970s to the early 2000s across OECD countries. I know it's not very visible, but you get the Scandinavian countries over there, and then Turkey, Greece, Mexico, Italy, Hungary, and some of the Eastern European ones on the other end. And then the colors are trying to show the changes throughout the decades. This is on maternal employment rates, so how mothers with young kids are attached to the labor market. And obviously there are differences across having babies under 2 and young children between 3 and 5. And you see again some differences, considerable ones across countries. And you see quite a few countries where, okay, so which one is the pointer? Okay. Where there are huge differences in terms of the mothers with very young kids and then the ones with school-age kids, whereas there are some countries where these differences are not that huge. So obviously there are some policies there that help those mothers dealing with work-life balance. I'm not going to talk about all this. You guys probably are more familiar with it. What we know in terms of welfare state and happiness link is somewhat controversial. There was some research on government size and subjective well-being, then also some other ones on trying to link social spending per GDP. Some finding positive effects, some not finding significant effects. And then there is the tries on benefit generosity and subjective well-being on a country level. And some positive effects there, as have been also mentioned by Kelsey yesterday. In this work family literature, which is more the welfare policy and gender wage gap literature, there's a lot of work on different policies and also on the gender wage gap, but there is really no attention on subjective well-being at all, I should say. This is just to show you the different regimes that are identified in this literature. I guess most of you are familiar with the classic welfare regime typology of Esping Anderson, having Nordic countries, then continental European countries, and liberal Anglo-Saxon type welfare states, and then the southern and the post-socialist Eastern European ones in separate groups. And then there is another typology suggested by Walter Corpi that's more zooming into this work family policies, and that's coming up with a slightly different but quite similar classification, putting countries into 4 groups of where there is the traditional family-oriented countries in mostly continental Europe. Some of the more market-oriented with low public support for childcare and limited leave policies in the Anglo-Saxon world. And then the dual earner career, that's how he calls it, which is the Nordic countries where there's really high and broad support from the state for all this work and family. And the Eastern ones are kind of hybrid regimes. So these are the questions that are kind of leading my research, and I know this is more than one paper, so please excuse me for that. It's more an exploration that I'm doing here right now. That's not like one specific paper yet. So what is the effect of employment status? Is there any differences between men and women? I was trying to look at that, and then partly linked with what we heard before from Thanasis, and then whether we see any differences with respect to regimes or actual given policies, and then zooming into the issue of working mothers and how that can be solved across different countries. So the sample is from the European Social Survey, working age, and excluding the ones who are in institutions or military and retired. I add quite a lot of contextual country level variables from various sources. Well, besides the typology of regimes, also the benefit generosity measure by Scruggs that Cassie has also been using in various papers, and then also some social spending, family policy spending, and labor market policy spending from OECD. Also some childcare enrollment and parental leave policy data, as well as the regime typology of Corpi, or the gender equality index. But you'll see, of course, I'm not introducing all this at the same time, but separately. So I'm trying to do, on one hand, linear regressions with country clustered errors, and also multi-level ones to somehow show if I can detect some differences in life satisfaction. So with some individual characteristics, and then with some country level variables. And the data are weighted to reflect the survey design. Mm-hmm. So the individual controls are pretty much what is usual in the literature. So age, education level, marital status, subjective health is also there, and number of children, ethnic minorities, social contacts. And in European social survey data, you don't have household income as a level, but just the deciles where the household belongs. So that's a drawback, but I created also one based on some of the answers on how they cope. So what's their subjective evaluation of coping from income. And these are the country context variables. Okay. By some descriptive look at exploring the data by these regimes, what we can see is there are minor differences there in terms of gender, but we see that maybe already here we can see that in the southern and post-socialist regimes, the pattern is a bit contrary to what has been found before. So the female positive gap is not necessarily showing there. And if I break it down by different activity status, this is just another version of, instead of giving you a huge table with a lot of numbers. So this is the levels, and I know we need to take into account all the cultural differences across these regimes, but it's interesting that we can still, you know, visibly spot some issues there. So for example, even those who are in paid work, which are always the blue columns in Eastern European and Southern European countries, both among women and men are actually worse off than those who are unemployed in Nordic countries. And then you can explore much more differences. You can also see the same visualization I did with age, and you can see how in Nordic countries it's kind of much more leveled up, and in other countries you see the U shape much more prevalently. So it's really a series of estimations that I did when I turned to the multi-level one. And introducing a lot of things one by one. These are the individual level variables with the education level and then activity, and then of course going further with all the other controls and subsequent estimations. And then what's interesting here is the female dummy is pretty much positive in the overall sample. But what has been also explored differently by Thanatis is the different sources of household income. We will see that the ones who are living in on unemployment benefits or other social benefits are usually having a negative effect there. On country levels, this is where I'm introducing the regimes, and separately, I'm sorry, looked at the generosity measure. So I can see that there is already, like, on an individual negative, like you can say a penalty from the base, which is the Nordic in this case, across all these regimes. But especially when I introduced that index, that's kind of measuring the gender equality, summing up a lot of issues on gender issues, and it's published by a European agency, then these welfare regime effects are changing quite significantly. And that's what puzzled me. I'm not going to go through all this, but it's pretty much what you all know from the literature. What I also find here is that, you know, subjective health and social contacts matter a lot. And then being a student and having a partner and these kind of things matter at the individual level. But what's more important here is the living on unemployment benefit and non-social assistance is strongly significant for both genders. But if I break it down and look at subsamples of women and men, then I can say that living on unemployment benefit is substantially more harmful for men than it is for women. And we can also see the other social benefits as sources of household income. And then being in the status of being unemployed and looking for a job is also something that bothers both genders, but it bothers men more than it does women. Also having a previous long-lasting unemployment period is quite negative for both. So of course, that's kind of partly coming from still the male breadwinner idea of that's still prevalent in a lot of countries. If I put together social expenditures and mean life satisfaction, this is just to show you that there might be some country clubs there. So this is just a reinforcement for me that this whole idea to somehow think in terms of these welfare regimes is not a whole stupid idea, because you really see some clubs, but you also see that there is some positive association there. Same thing with, for example, mother's employment rate across countries and the mean life satisfaction. You see that there is definitely something going on there, and then there are the Nordic countries up there, and then some of the southern and eastern European ones in the other end. This is with childcare provision by the state, and this is just correlations. I was curious to look at that, and I know we don't take it as like hard evidence, but still the policy variables were really showing up also in the correlation table in terms of female life satisfaction, and also in terms of the differences in life satisfaction. So if back to the multivariate one, what I can say is that this welfare regime dummies really capture something. They kind of still seem to be a useful typology. There is this penalty for compared to Nordic countries for females as well as males. And then the overall welfare generosity is positive and significant, but when I introduce the gender, that variable that measures gender norms more, than its effects disappear. And then when I look at only the subsample of mothers, then again, its effects disappear. So it's something else. It's not the whole overall generosity of the welfare state that matters for mothers. So I was really trying to look at the policies separately. Yeah, this is the same thing. So basically, that there is really this strong direct effect of the regimes, and then how it changes when I introduce the gender index into the estimations. And then I was trying to play around with some, with some specifications, and then I picked one that I told you had all those controls, and then looked at the predictive margins there. So we really see also in those margins, how there is this penalty across welfare regimes compared to Nordic ones. This is how those who are unemployed and male, that's the green one, and the yellow one is unemployed and female, how they are looking alike in terms of predictive margins across welfare states compared to those who are employed. And this is the other typology, because I was curious, because of coming from this policy background, which one seems to be working well. And then also the Corpi typology is showing that the market-oriented Anglo-Saxon world is where things are the worst in this respect, and then the hybrid regimes of Eastern Europe actually perform a little bit better. So now when I turn into the actual policies separately, and I try to look at the social expenditures, the labor market policies, the family spending, I see some direct effects there, which then, of course, naturally disappear when I put them into interactions. When I put being female into interactions with those policies, which was positive on its own, then we can see that these family policies do not seem to moderate the picture too much for females. Okay, I'm trying to hurry up. So when I zoom in then a little bit more into those who are working age mothers and just look at the subsample, then I see if I compare them with childless women, there are substantial. Oh, I'm sorry, I always try to use the pointer and it's not doing what I want. So you see these differences are quite remarkable when it comes to mothers and childless women, whereas you know, in Scandinavian or continental European countries, it's not so much. I'm not going to go through again for what I found on the individual level for mothers. It's pretty similar to earlier findings. This is how the margins look like in terms of being in paid work, which is the blue line, and not being in paid work. So you can see that only in Southern European countries, there is this puzzling result that maybe even some of those mothers who are not in paid work are actually predicted to be a bit better, but of course you can see the huge negative downward penalty compared to Nordic countries. And then this is just about different activity status, being in paid work or being unemployed and looking for work. Only on the sample of working age mothers by these different regime typologies, and also the model that I used is showing what was visible at the descriptive version, is that the childless mothers are predicted to be having a higher life satisfaction compared to mothers with any number of kids. It's like a different number of kids. I have to improve my graphs, I know. So all in all, what I find in this is that I don't necessarily manage to disentangle those minuscule effects of policies too well. So maybe I should do something else. I see that GDP, if I include GDP, then it picks up everything. So it's kind of, taking it all, and then the policies don't have any place there. Then there is the welfare generosity measure, but since that is not really including all these work family policies, but more the unemployment and the pension type of policies, that's why I was trying to use this welfare regime typology rather than the generosity one. And then I still see that if I put this index, that's the gender equality index and life satisfaction, there really is work for more research there because there are really strong country clubs. So there maybe the whole thing is gender norms that's leading this whole picture, and that's where we need to do further research, I think. And I conclude here. So those gender norms are making it really hard to reconcile work and family.
This is quite interesting, right? The Scruggs index, as you know, is missing the gender. Did you do any analyses, including both Scruggs at the same time, overall welfare generosity measure, which, you know, with gender? Could you just do both of them at the same time in maybe like a horse race, or maybe there's a way to combine the two? So that's one question. And then another one I was thinking about, you have selection into work as well as selection into parenthood. So, you know, I'm thinking that it would be helpful to have a, you know, some structure around this to think about, you know, good controls, bad controls, mediators, these kinds of things, to, you know, see how the welfare regimes are affecting people and through all of these channels and affecting women really in this case, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's a next step to somehow play around with just having the welfare generosity and the gender in an estimation. So I haven't done that so far, but thanks. I'm gonna play around with that and see if I can come up with something, because that can be tackled as like a continuous measure. So it's better in many sense than this regime typology. Yeah, the selection effects, self-selection. I'm looking for any suggestions how to deal with that, because I know that's a strong thing there. I just don't know what could be good, you know, for doing this like in a two-stage setup, or in like a Heckman setup. What could be a good variable that's driving this, you know, that you can use in the Heckman. But we can discuss this if you have any good ideas.